It's time to take a look at what's been dominating headlines, and to do that, we're joined by Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies scholar Kylie Gilbert.
Yeah, she's joining us ahead of her appearance at the Sydney Writers' Festival, where she's speaking about her book, The Uncaged Sky, that details the 804 days she spent as a political prisoner in Iran. Kylie Gilbert joins us now. Kylie Gilbert, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming on this morning. And we're starting off with looking at this article out of Foreign Policy about the conflict in Ukraine, as Steve Kinane was speaking there, and looking at the sources, going to the source on the ground and the Ukrainians on the ground for information.
Yeah, I chose this article because when the war with Ukraine broke out in the first initial days, I was quite struck by the swiftness with which a lot of Western commentators and journalists moved to write off Ukraine and just expect a Russian victory as being imminent. And this article kind of delves into why that might be and looks at some of the quote-unquote critical blind spots and inherent biases which some Western commentating on matters of Ukraine and Russia has been plagued with. And this kind of touched a nerve for me because I've seen it amongst academic experts as well. We have a tendency now not to even bother visiting the countries that we're supposedly experts on. Academic fieldwork is getting more and more difficult, my situation in Iran being a case in point. And a lot of academics and scholars and experts don't even learn the languages or bother really conducting fieldwork in the countries that they're specialising in. And I think this article does a really good job of explaining some of these kind of echo chambers and blind spots that both journalists and academics can find themselves in when it comes to analysing and discussing international events. And, I myself have actually visited Ukraine and Russia a couple of times in the past as a tourist, so I'm quite interested in the war that's going on now, and I'm quite amazed by the bravery of Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians. And I found this article to be really, really interesting and provide a fresh analysis on a subject that's been analysed so much already in the media and press.
I'm interested too because at the core of this article it talks about the tendency in the Western media and among Western observers to overestimate the Russian case for war and underestimate the Ukrainian defence against it. And I'm interested that you see that playing out in academia as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as I was saying, it becomes a bit of an echo chamber when we're all relying on the same English language sources. And the article makes the excellent point that despite the fact that Ukrainians are party to the conflict, actually, a lot of the information that they've been providing since the outset of the war has been very accurate and later on verified by international sources. So really, we need to be trusting more in what the Ukrainians themselves on the ground are telling us, rather than, international punditry, which may have never set foot in the country and not speak the language and not have that much expertise.
Kylie, you're also looking at this story in AP News about these two Europeans who have been detained in Iran, and the charges are quite vague. The charges are planning to cause chaos, social disorder and instability. What exactly does that mean?
It means probably that these people are innocent. We know that they are two French tourists. A Swedish tourist was actually also arrested by the Iranians only 2 weeks ago. So they've arrested 3 completely foreign tourists visiting Iran for short periods of time, very similar to my own situation again, in a very, very short time. And the article makes the point that these arrests are likely connected to international events. The 2 French tourists were arrested during the visit by the EU chief negotiator over the JCPOA nuclear deal. Now, Enrique Mora was visiting Iran in order to try and break an impasse that's been reached on the deal, made complicated by the war in Ukraine and Russia's participation in the negotiations, but also by the intransience of the Iranian regime and their demands, which are quite unreasonable, really, that the Revolutionary Guard Corps be removed from the US terror list. And these 2 French citizens have been caught up in that. I don't think it's a coincidence that they were arrested during the EU envoy's visit. And this is also happening parallel to the trial of an Iranian official for war crimes in Sweden. And this official has been linked to the deaths of thousands of innocent political prisoners in the 1980s in Iran. And he travelled to Sweden of his own volition, and the Swedish authorities arrested him under the principles of universal jurisdiction and have put him on trial for war crimes. And the Iranians are very, very angry about this. And in retaliation, they arrested a Swedish tourist and have said that they will execute a Swedish citizen, a man called Ahmed Reza Jalali, who's actually an academic like myself, was visiting Iran like myself to attend an academic conference, and was arrested and is believed to have provided a confession under torture to the bogus espionage claims that have been applied to him, and subsequently received the death penalty. And in response to this trial of Hamid Nouri for war crimes in Sweden, the Iranians are threatening to execute him. So there's been a real ramping up of Iran's hostage diplomacy in the past few weeks, and it's more and more nakedly linked to Iranian demands in negotiations and over this war crimes trial, rather than, any real pretense of these people actually being guilty of a security crime.
We'll come back to some of these thoughts in a moment, Kylie Gilbert, because these are obviously issues that are very close to your heart and mind. You leave a piece of yourself behind, I think, when you go to any place in the world, and particularly in the circumstances that you've been in Iran. I want to go to this other story in the meantime, though. We'll get to your book in a moment, but this appearance of a Chinese spy ship off the WA coast in the last couple of days. Timing is very interesting, and how it plays into the political framework, the political sort of atmosphere in Australia right now, a week out from the election.
Yeah, you make a really good point, Jeremy. That was the very first thing I thought of when I saw this article. We are in the middle of an election cycle, 1 week to go, I believe, today, and obviously the coalition knows that the electorate perceives them to be very, very strong on border protection and defence. So I think the disclosure of the presence of this Chinese spy ship probably is linked to that. We know that Peter Dutton, who was the one who made the announcement, he's sort of the government's favourite attack dog when it comes to matters of security in China. But that being said, I think there are very real concerns, and it is very worrying that a Chinese spy ship would travel so far into Australia's economic zone. I mean, off the coast of WA, and I believe there was one recently off the coast of the NT as well. I think this is probably a tit-for-tat affair because of Australia's involvement in the South China Sea dispute and freedom of navigation there. And the Chinese are basically saying, well, look, we can do the same thing to you. But yeah, it is very concerning, but I do think the disclosure of it probably is linked to the election cycle as well.
And Kylie Gilbert, we mentioned earlier that you'll be appearing at the Sydney Writers' Festival with your book. What's the reception been like for your book, and what are your plans for the Sydney Writers' Festival?
Well, I'm appearing at two events at the Sydney Writers' Festival, one next Friday and the other next Saturday night. The first at Parramatta Riverside Theatres and the second at Carriage Works in the city. And yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to speaking about my book and meeting people, meeting potential readers perhaps. The reception's been pretty positive so far, and it's been quite overwhelming to travel around and do book-related events, and it's obviously quite a full-on subject to be discussing so frequently. But I do really, really enjoy meeting my readers, and it's still surreal to me to even think that anybody's read the book, to be honest. But it's really important to me to get the message out there about Iran's hostage diplomacy and the nefarious activities of this regime and how they are targeting innocent foreigners such as myself. So it's been a great experience so far, and I'm really, really looking forward to coming to Sydney and talking a little bit more about my book.
Can I tell you something else too? I find it extraordinary that I'm sitting here talking to you, having reported on your situation for so long. I wonder what it's like for you. You said it's a really full-on thing to talk about. What is it like for you, kind of going through that, writing about it, talking to people about it? From your mental health point of view, from your capacity to move on from that situation, what is it like?
Oh, thanks so much for your support, Jeremy, and to everyone at the ABC for doing all they could to publicise my ordeal when I was in prison. It really means the world to me, and I just wish I, had some clue of it when I was there in my cell, thinking nobody cared. It is quite difficult at times to bring up some of these subjects, in promoting the book and even in writing the book. But I did find it quite therapeutic as well. Certainly the writing process, it was healing for me to get it out and, to tell my side of the story, because I'd been the victim of so much propaganda within Iran after my arrest, and it felt quite liberating to be able to speak up and actually tell the truth about what happened to me. But yeah, I mean, you have your good days and your bad days, of course, and recovery from such an ordeal is a process, and I think I'm on that journey. I don't think I've reached the end just yet, but overall I'm doing pretty well, and I do enjoy talking about my experiences, and I feel a sense of duty that it's my responsibility to speak about them.
That's a really great thing to hear, and congratulations on the book. Anyone who's written a book, which I haven't, knows it's quite the ordeal in itself, so well done.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for having me on.